Hey everyone, and welcome to tonight's deep dive. We are going to be talking about something that's been blowing up all over X lately. It's AI, and specifically, the privacy and the ethical questions that come up when we talk about AI. It seems like it's everywhere these days. What's interesting to me is that so many people don't seem to realize just how much AI is already part of our everyday lives. Like, it's not just something out of a sci-fi movie anymore, right?
Yeah, it's pretty amazing how integrated it's become. And it's only going to get more so, which I think is why these questions about how our data is being used are so important.
Exactly. So maybe we can start with some examples. Can you give us like just a really basic everyday example of how AI is already at work in most people's lives?
Sure. Think about the last time you were shopping online, you know, browsing for something specific. Or maybe it's scrolling through a site and
Mm.
you start to see recommendations, things that you might like, things that are similar to what you've looked at before. That's AI.
So it's like the algorithm is learning about you
Yeah.
and then using that information to kind of predict what you want to see.
Exactly. And it can get even more sophisticated, like
Yeah.
some algorithms can analyze your past purchases, your browsing history, even your social media activity to figure out what you might be interested in buying.
So on the one hand, it's pretty cool. Like it can save you time, help you find things you might not have known about. But
Yeah.
there's also that other side of it. Like, how much does this thing really know about me?
Right. And that's the tension we're seeing play out on a lot of these debates online. People are starting to ask these questions like, is this convenience worth the potential costs to our privacy?
Exactly. And it's not just theoretical anymore either. We've seen some pretty high-profile data breaches lately
Yeah.
that have involved AI.
Yeah. And that's definitely added fuel to the fire.
So let's try to break down some of the different sides of this debate. Maybe we can start with the folks who are really excited about AI,
Mhm.
the ones who see it as a force for good.
Oh.
What are their main arguments?
So the pro-AI camp, they really believe that this technology can be used to solve some of the world's biggest problems, like
Mhm.
everything from healthcare to climate change. They see AI as a way to improve efficiency, personalize experiences, even enhance privacy.
Enhanced privacy. How does
Yeah.
that work?
One of the big things they point to is this concept called federated learning. It's a way of training AI models on data that's spread out across lots of different devices. So instead of all your data being uploaded to a central server, it stays on your device, which makes it much harder for hackers to get their hands on it.
So it's like
Yeah.
instead of having all your eggs in one basket, you're spreading them out.
Exactly.
Are there any companies that are actually using this approach?
Yeah, Apple. They use a technique called differential privacy, which is basically a way of adding noise to data sets. So it's impossible to identify individual users, but you can still get valuable insights from the data as a whole.
So it's kind of like
Yeah.
you're blurring out the details,
Yeah.
but you can still see the big picture. Okay, so that's one way that AI can potentially be used to enhance privacy.
Hmm.
What are some of the other things that the pro-AI folks are pushing for?
Transparency is huge. They want to make sure that AI development is open and accountable so that users understand how these algorithms are making decisions and what data is being used.
So no more black boxes.
Right. And then there's also a big push for ethical frameworks to guide AI development to make sure that these systems are fair, unbiased,
Mm.
and used for good.
Okay, that all makes sense. But of course, there's another side to this story. What about the people who are more skeptical of AI? What are their main concerns?
Well, they argue that AI is developing too quickly,
Hmm.
and we haven't fully thought through all the potential consequences they worry about, what's often called the black box problem, where even the people who create these AI systems don't fully understand how they work, which raises all sorts of questions about bias, discrimination, even manipulation.
Yeah, that's a scary thought. Like,
Yeah.
what if an algorithm is making decisions about your life and you have no idea how it's coming to those conclusions?
Right. And that's a big concern because a lot of these AI systems, they're trained on massive amounts of data.
Oh.
And that data, it can reflect existing biases in society. So if we're not careful, AI could end up amplifying those biases and perpetuating harmful stereotypes.
So even if the people developing AI have good intentions, the data itself could be tainted.
Exactly.
Wow, this is heavy stuff. It feels like we're at a real crossroads here.
It does. And the decisions we make now about how we develop and use AI, they're going to have huge consequences down the road.
So it's more important than ever
Yeah.
to have these conversations, to really think critically
Yeah.
about the implications of this technology.
I agree.
And speaking of conversations, we want to hear from you. You've got a poll running right now asking the big question. Do you trust AI with your data? Take a second, think about it,
Mm-hmm.
and cast your vote. We'll share the results later in the show.
Yeah, it's definitely something to ponder,
Yeah.
especially given all the different perspectives we've just discussed.
Okay, so we've heard from the pro-AI folks. We've heard from the skeptics. Now, I'm curious to hear what the experts have to say. What are some of the leading voices in this field saying about AI privacy and ethics?
Well, we actually have quotes from two very prominent figures who've been really vocal in this debate.
Okay, let's hear it.
So, first we have Dr. Jane Morrison. She's a leading data privacy advocate, and she's been very outspoken on X about the need for stronger regulations to protect individual rights in the age of AI.
So she's coming at it from a kind of a cautious perspective.
Yeah, she's definitely concerned about the potential risks, and she believes we need to put some guardrails in place to make sure AI is used responsibly.
Okay. What about the other experts?
So we also have a quote from Sam Patel. He's a well-respected AI developer, and he takes a slightly different stance. He believes that we can build AI systems that are both powerful and privacy conscious.
So he's more optimistic.
Yeah, he thinks we can find solutions that balance innovation with ethical considerations.
Okay, so we've got two very different perspectives here. On the one hand, a call for stricter regulations, and on the other, a belief in the power of responsible AI development. How do we navigate this? Where do we go from here?
That's the big question. And to answer it, we need to look at the bigger picture, the global implications of AI.
Okay, so we're going global now. This is getting even more interesting. Stay tuned, folks. Because in part 2 of this deep dive, we're going to explore how different countries around the world are approaching the challenges of AI, privacy, and ethics.
It's going to be fascinating.
I can't wait.
Welcome back to our deep dive on AI privacy and ethics. You know, before the break, we were talking about those two different perspectives, the folks who are pushing for stricter regulations, and then the ones who believe that we can develop AI responsibly without stifling innovation.
Right, and it feels like those two sides are kind of butting heads. Like,
Yeah.
how do we find that balance?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And the answer might be different depending on where you are in the world.
Oh, interesting. So you're saying that different countries are taking different approaches to AI.
Absolutely. In fact, one of the best examples is something we touched on earlier, the European Union's General Data Protection Regulation.
GDPR.
Yep, that's the one.
I remember when that came out, it was a pretty big deal.
It was a huge deal. It basically gave individuals in the EU way more control over their personal data. And it placed some pretty strict requirements on companies that collect and process that data.
So Europe is definitely taking a more cautious approach,
Yeah.
putting the emphasis on individual rights.
Right. And, you know, there's been some pushback. Some people argue that it's too burdensome for businesses or that it's stifling innovation.
But it sounds like it's also been pretty effective at protecting people's privacy.
That's the argument. And it's definitely had an impact. GDPR has become kind of a model for data protection regulations around the world.
Okay, so Europe is kind of leading the charge when it comes to data privacy. What about other parts of the world?
Well, you see a very different approach in countries like China. Well, in China, there's a much stronger emphasis on economic growth and national security.
So they're prioritizing those things over individual privacy.
It seems that way. They're investing heavily in AI research and development. But there are fewer regulations around data privacy.
That's a pretty stark contrast. So we've got Europe on one end of the spectrum and China on the other.
Yeah, and you've got a lot of countries somewhere in between.
Okay, but this is more than just a philosophical debate, right? These different approaches have real-world consequences.
Absolutely. For example, the use of AI-powered surveillance technologies in some countries has raised some serious concerns about human rights.
Yeah, that's pretty disturbing.
It is, and it highlights the need for some kind of global dialogue about how we're going to develop and use AI ethically.
Because this isn't just a national issue anymore, right? It's a global one.
Exactly. The decisions we make about AI today, they're going to affect everyone on the planet.
So how do we even begin to have that conversation? I mean, countries have such different priorities, different values.
It's a challenge, but it's not impossible. There are organizations out there, like the one we've been talking about, at AI for the People, that are trying to bring people together from all over the world to talk about these issues.
So they're trying to find common ground.
Yeah, and they're advocating for a more human-centered approach to AI.
That's encouraging. It gives me hope that we can actually figure this out.
I think we can too, but it's going to require a lot of open and honest dialogue.
For sure. And it's going to require us to really examine our own biases.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we've talked about the ethical implications of AI. We've talked about the different approaches being taken around the world. But I'm curious, what about the future? What does the future of AI look like, and what role do we all play in shaping that future?
Well, those are the questions we're going to explore in the final part of our deep dive.
Stay tuned, folks. Welcome back to the show, everyone, for the final part of our AI deep dive. We've covered a lot of ground so far, from how AI is already impacting our daily lives, to the hopes and fears people have about this technology, and even how different countries are approaching the whole AI thing. But now I want to zoom out even further and talk about the global impact of AI, because this isn't just a local issue or even a national issue anymore, is it?
Not at all. It's definitely a global phenomenon. And the choices we make now about how we develop and use AI are going to have ripple effects for everyone on the planet.
So what are some of the biggest global challenges that AI brings to the table?
Well, one of the most pressing concerns is the potential for AI to exacerbate existing inequalities.
Okay, so how would that happen?
Well, imagine a scenario
Right.
where access to AI technology and the benefits that come with it is concentrated in the hands of just a few powerful nations or corporations.
It's basically the rich get richer.
Pretty much. And the gap between the haves and the have-nots widens even further.
That makes sense. I mean, we've already seen how technology can create digital divides, and it's not hard to imagine AI making those divides even worse.
Right. And it's not just about access to gadgets or the internet. It's about access to things like healthcare, education, economic opportunities, even political power.
So it's really about fundamental rights and opportunities.
Absolutely.
It sounds like we need some kind of global approach to AI.
We do. We need to find ways to ensure that AI is used ethically and that the benefits are shared equitably.
Okay, but how do we do that? I mean, countries have different priorities, different values, different political systems.
It's a huge challenge, but I think it starts with dialogue. With international collaboration, we need to create shared principles and standards for ethical AI development.
That's where organizations like at AI for the People come in.
Right. Exactly. They're working to bring together researchers, policymakers, and advocates from all over the world to have these difficult conversations, to find common ground.
So they're building bridges across those divides.
Right. They are. And they're advocating for a more human-centered approach to AI.
You know, it's easy to get overwhelmed by all of this. But hearing you talk about these global efforts, it gives me hope that we can actually figure this out.
I think we can too, but it's going to require all of us to stay engaged.
Right? Like we can't just sit back and let technology dictate the future.
We can't. We need to be informed. We need to ask tough questions. And we need to hold the companies and institutions developing AI accountable.
That's a powerful message.
It's our responsibility to shape the future of AI, to make sure that it's used to create a world that is more just, more equitable, and more human.
Well said. I think that's a perfect note to end on. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into AI, privacy, and ethics. We hope you found it informative and thought-provoking. And remember, the conversation doesn't end here. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep the conversation going.
And be sure to check out @AI for Your People for more resources and ways to get involved.
Thanks for listening, everyone.